Welcome back to Miss Eddie's Math Movies, where it's a cute to be a square. Today's lesson is 6.4, Special Parallelograms. By the end of the lesson, you'll be able to use properties of special types of parallelograms. What are these special parallelograms that we're talking about? Well, there's rhombus, rectangle, and square. And a rhombus is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. 4 congruent sides. So if we were to draw a picture, it's a lot like a parallelogram, but all the sides are equal, not just the opposite sides. A rectangle is a parallelogram with 4 right angles. Which I'm sure that you already knew. But we'll draw a picture just to have a visual. 4 right angles. So it has all the characteristics of parallelogram too. The opposite sides are equal, the opposite angles are equal, just like parallelogram, because it is a parallelogram. And a square is a combination of the two. A square is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles. So it's like a combination of these two shapes. You get the right angles and you get the 4 congruent sides. So these are kind of what we're looking for when we go to identify them. In the diagram, A, B, C, D is a rectangle. So right away, since I know it's a rectangle, I know that means 4 right angles. So I'm going to put that in my picture. Find AD and AB. AD. Well, I know that the opposite sides are equal. That's a characteristic from parallelogram that rectangle gets, since a rectangle is a parallelogram. So AD is 5 and AB is 8. And then it says find angle A, angle B, angle C, and angle D. Well, we already know what those angles are. We know they're right angles because that's what it means to be a rectangle. So it's because the opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent. We know that AD is equal to BC, which is 5. And AB was equal to DC, which was 8. And all of those angles equal 90. All right. You need to find QR, RS, and SP. I want you to go ahead and do that now. This is a rhombus, so think about what you know about a rhombus. Go look at the definition. For a rhombus, all 4 sides are equal. Use that. All right, so here's how we prove that a shape is a rhombus. If it has 4 congruent sides, then it has to be a rhombus. There's no other way. And if you see 4 right angles, it has to be a rectangle. And then if you see a combination of these two, it has to be a square. 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles. Square gets both. Name the special quadrilateral. Well, let's see. I see right offhand 4 right angles. So I know if it has 4 right angles, it has to be a rectangle. But could it be a square? Are all 4 sides the same on this shape? No, they're not. 3 and 5 are not the same. So this cannot be a square. It must be a rectangle. The quadrilateral has 4 right angles. So by the rectangle corollary, this must be a rectangle. Because all of the sides are not the same length, you know that the quadrilateral is not a square. These would have to be the same, and they're not. Use the information to name the special quadrilateral. All right, do this now. Use your definitions, use those theorems. No assuming, you have to know why, what shape they are. So what kind of shape is this and what kind of shape is this? No assuming. We talked about this in our activity. The diagonals of a rhombus, so here's one diagonal, here's the other, they make a right angle. The word for that is perpendicular. Remember, that means 90 degrees. So that angle right there is 90 degrees on a rhombus. So here's an example where we have to use that. Find the value of x. Well, I want you to look really closely at this triangle. Hopefully you remember how many degrees in a triangle. There's 180 degrees in a triangle, and we just learned that these lines in a rhombus, and this is a rhombus, make a right angle. So I want you to put a right angle in there. The diagonals are perpendicular. Therefore, it's a right angle, which makes it a right triangle. All right, so to figure this out, let's see how much we already have. We already have 60 degrees, and we already have 90 degrees. So we're going to do 180 minus 60 minus 90, which is 180 minus 150, which is 30 degrees. Angle x must be 30 degrees because we need 180 degrees in our triangle. And notice that 60 and 30 make 90. They are complementary. That's what happens in a right triangle. Now in a rectangle, so in a rhombus, the diagonals are perpendicular. In a rectangle, the diagonals are congruent. They are the same length. And look, that's not the case in the rhombus. Look, we have this long diagonal and we have this shorter diagonal. But in a rectangle, they're the same length. All of these parts are the same. This is, you nail 4 pieces of wood together to build a 4-sided frame as shown. What is the shape of the frame? Well, I don't know anything about the angles yet. All I know is that the opposite sides are equal. So all I know is that it's a parallelogram. I don't know if the angles are right. And then it says the diagonals measure 7 foot 4 inches by 7 feet 2 inches. Is it a rectangle? Well, what do we know about the diagonals of a rectangle? Let's go look. The diagonals of a rectangle are congruent. They're supposed to be the same. These are not the same. So this is not a rectangle. Because the diagonals aren't congruent. What theorem did you use? Well, we just used theorem 6.11. That's the one we just looked at. That tells us that the diagonals must be congruent. All right, you have to answer these questions. So look at this shape. Is it a rhombus? Is it a parallelogram? Is it a rectangle? Are the diagonals congruent? So remember, for rhombus, you're asking yourself, are there 4 congruent sides? Are there 4 right? Oops, I'm sorry. Parallelogram, there's lots of ways of telling, but we could ask ourselves, are the opposite angles equal? For a rectangle, are there 4 right angles? And then are the diagonals congruent? Well, that's true in a rectangle. So is this a rectangle? These are the questions that you're answering here and explaining. So go ahead and do this now. I'm just using the definitions for these. That's all for today. This is M Cubed signing out.